Good evening, everyone. Hi, we'll just wait, a couple of people still sitting down. Good evening and welcome to the first of the Data Lab community meetups for 2026. My name is Heather Thompson and I'm Chief Executive at the Data Lab Innovation Centre. I'd like to thank you all for coming tonight, especially on such a horrible evening. And also welcome to our online audience who are watching at home. I hope you enjoy the conversation. So we have no fire drills planned tonight. If the alarm sounds, please exit via the nearest fire exit, which for us is the front door, just out there. So this event is part of the Data Lab community. For those who, it might be your first event or are not aware, our community has over 8,000 data and AI professionals, students, enthusiasts from over 100 countries, and that was established in 2021. We run regular events and webinars. We've got discussion groups, we've got forums, we run a mentorship scheme, and it's a place where you can find like-minded peers, you can ask questions, and you can gain support. And the great news is it's all for free. So if anyone isn't a member, you can sign up using the QR code on the slide behind me. A huge thank you to our Data Lab partners, without which this sort of event would not be possible, and to our funders who help us to support Scotland's data and AI community. And just before we get into things, a reminder to tag us on LinkedIn. So every January has become a bit of a tradition to start off the year for our community by imagining what the next 12 months of innovations are likely to be across data, AI and tech. So tonight is an opportunity to think big and dream about what the future might bring, new innovations on the horizon, how society may shift as we adapt to the new norms. Over the course of the next 60 minutes, we'll look ahead to pause and reflect on how new technologies might impact our day-to-day lives, how they might change the way we work, and whether we're doing so ethically and with our best interests at heart. So we're going to spend the next 45 minutes having a panel discussion. I'm just about to introduce our panellists, after which we'll have the opportunity for the audience to ask questions. So if you do have any questions coming out, hold on to them because you will get the chance to ask these at the end. So without further ado, I'd like to invite our panel to join us. So we have Stephanie Earp, who's Head of AI at Space Intelligence. We also have Nick Granger, OBE, who was just at the end of last year, I'm delighted to say, was appointed as chair of the Data Lab and is also Chief Information and Financial Officer at the North Sea Transition Authority. And last but not least, we have Emily Sullivan, who's co-director at the Centre for Technomoral Futures. So before we start thinking about this year, on the slide behind me, hopefully, yes, we have some of the predictions that were made by our panel at the start of 2025. So up here, there's predictions, but also some hopes and wishes for the year ahead. So I'd really like to start off by asking our panelists to give a brief introduction about themselves, but also as part of that to provide some thoughts on how accurate these thoughts and wishes actually were, now that we're in 2026. So, Nick.
Justin, is this on? Just check.
I need to push it.
There we go. Good start for me with failing to sit on a stool and turn on a microphone. So, hi everyone, I'm Nick. My background is quite varied between sort of digital data technology, transformation, and I also a member of the dark side as I'm an accountant. So sorry about that. In the day job, I'm CIFO at the North Sea Transition Authority, where our role is to regulate and influence elements of offshore energy as we accelerate the energy transition. As Heather said, I've recently joined the Data Lab as chair, and I also sit on the board of a couple of other organisations that work with digital technology, data and AI. I wasn't able to make this event last year, so having looked at the 2025 predictions, to be honest, some of these could be 2026 predictions, right? I'm not sure that we've moved on in some of these areas since this time last year. So agentic AI was our starting point when we kind of had a brief intro chat, and that's on the slide. Change is on the slide, and I think that one never goes away. I think there are some things on here that haven't actually happened. Whether those will happen in 2026, we'll wait and see. But I think a lot has happened in 25. I'm not saying these predictions were wrong. I think they were right. But I don't think that we've necessarily moved on that significantly from that point. Now, I had it easy because I got to speak first, so I'll pass over to others.
Yeah, great, thanks. I'm Emily Sullivan. I'm a senior lecturer in philosophy and ethics of AI at the University of Edinburgh. And I'm the co-director of the Center for Technomoral Futures, which is in the Edinburgh Futures Institute, which is a research center at the Edinburgh Futures Institute. And we're an interdisciplinary research center that hopes to make sure that AI and technology can actually help promote human flourishing instead of doom and gloom. So in terms of the predictions from last year, so yeah, echoing what was just said, but I also saw that at least the way that the predictions were written up, there was a lot of optimism. And also, the geopolitical situation has greatly changed since January 1st of 2025. I'm American, so President Donald Trump took office then, and we saw a complete backlash against AI regulation, at least in the United States. And since they host a lot of these big tech companies, this optimism for regulation that we saw from last year's discussion has kind of withered away a bit. So I think we'll talk about that a little bit later. Yep.
So hi, I'm Steph. I'm the head of AI at Space Intelligence. My background's very much in science. I'm a scientist by training. Anything to do with geo, so the ground geophysics, geoscience is really my passion. And now it's about using machine learning and AI to augment science to help us make better discoveries or use AI to improve how we do science rather than replace it. At Space Intelligence, we work very much in forest conservation. Our mission is to stop deforestation and enable reforestation and afforestation. We use satellite machine learning data, lots of vision ML and all of that for that role. In terms of last year's predictions, I'm going last, so it's the hardest because I agree with everything that they all said. And I think, again, they were very optimistic, and I think that we've made progress, but not as much as we'd hoped, I think, at the beginning of 25. One thing that came out for me was the idea that this distrust and this scrutiny over AI, and I think in the tech community, for people that are aware, for people that are using it and building it, we've started talking about that a lot more, especially maybe the research domain, but it's not filtered through into the general public and conscience yet, which was one of the things they suggested in 2025.
Great, thank you. So up there, as you might expect, agentic remains a hot topic now, still a long way to go. So what do we think is next for agentic AI? Like, what developments do you think we might expect to see over the next 12 months? Anyone who'd like to answer that?
We have seen, like in the prediction from last year, there is this kind of increase now with agentic AI, and I expect that this is going to increase in the next year. Just picking on one example of it, at the University of Edinburgh, what came to our attention is that now students are using AI agents on the learning platforms. So things like Canvas, Learn, Blackboard, they are now embedded. You can get agents to be embedded in those learning platforms, and then the AI agent can just do all your work for you. The vendors said that that's not their responsibility. So they're washing their hands of it, and so now it's left in the university's lap to try to figure out what to do with this problem. So that poses risks not just in the integrity of their education, but also risks, security risks, and data leakage. So I think that moving forward to 2026, we really need to take a hard look at how we might want to restrict these AI agents and try to hold certain vendors accountable for these things in the education context. But I do have a prediction, a very specific, concrete prediction, that because these AI agents have such a security risk and can be embedded now in all sorts of platforms that we didn't think before, my prediction is that there will be at least one high-profile security event where there's data leakage involving AI agents, and it would be a severe kind of security event that occurs. So for those of you who are working in technology, maybe one thing you can try to do is try to fix those security holes for AI agents, maybe to then make that prediction obsolete.
Yeah, moving on from that, from the public sector to a more private sector, commercial sense. Last year, in terms of agentic AI, and bearing in mind the company I work for, we have a lot of very intelligent data scientists and machine learning engineers and people that work with this daily. A lot of people would come up to me going, "Why aren't we using agentic? Why we're doing this the old way? We're going to get left behind." And I think over the next year, people are going to start stopping and thinking and waiting and saying, should we? How should we? Why should we? And start asking the right questions again of, would trying to use and incorporate agentic AI help my workflow, help me with my job? Is it actually something that I need to do, or can I do it in a much easier way?
I don't know whether this is a prediction or where I think things should be going. I think agentic AI has had some success in the kind of chatbot space, but I think moving much more to kind of enterprise-grade agentic AI, where it's being used to actually improve the business life cycle or organizational life cycle. I think that's where it should be moving. Do I think we're ready as a country to move there to the kind of virtual co-worker space? I don't think we are yet. So it's kind of a non-prediction that something won't happen that perhaps others say should.
Okay, and that leads in quite nicely to my next question, just reflecting on one of the other predictions that came up from last year around business. And something that we at the Data Lab are a broken record on is the fact that that foundation of everything AI lies in data. And so really keen to understand, do you think we'll continue to see businesses getting better at understanding and managing their data fundamentals in order to capitalise on the value and potential benefits that data and AI can bring to their organisations?
I want to say yes, but I think it might be no. I think organisations who've got a good handle on their data foundation, so whether that's data quality, data architecture, the kind of technology stack that is using and making the data accessible, I think organisations like that will be able to generate a huge amount of value in whatever their purpose is, whether that's shareholder value, whether that's, for us, like net zero value. Organisations that don't have the data fundamentals, the data foundations in place are not going to be able to get that value as easily. And I think, as was being said, of people perhaps jumping to AI as the solution, what is the problem? I think organisations that don't have the data fundamentals in place will get pushed by their stakeholders to use AI in a situation where they're not actually ready for it.
I feel we've been talking about this for a very long time. I think the Data Lab even kind of started because of this, because we realized that data was so important. And we've looked at it a lot from a business sense, from how can we use it and access it for all our basic tools that we have. And I think I might come on to this a bit later, I do believe we're starting to get to that point when people are going, actually, AI is kind of the same thing, that we need to stop and look at our business like fundamentals and how we structure things, and can we actually use it? And it's going to go from that, oh, hey, look at me, I made an agent and it does this cool thing, to actually starting to integrate it into what we currently have in the business, or, you know, restructure. And this will come from the businesses that already have their data fundamentals there, that this year are going to start talking and advertising about the fact that they can do this. Hopefully, my prediction is that will make other companies wake up and realize that's what they need to do before they can also start utilizing AI in an integrated way within their business.
Yeah, I think that there's a risk to just grab these off-the-shelf models from these big companies like OpenAI or Google, and then you don't actually have control of your own data, and that you produce kind of results that are just kind of baseline that other companies would then produce, that you're not getting those, that kind of edge to it. So yeah, thinking more about tailoring like bespoke models to your own purposes, so that you're not giving away your insights to these big tech companies. I think we see a lot of problems with this kind of algorithmic monoculture, where the same companies are using the same models, producing the same results, getting the same kinds of errors, right? So I think there might be a potential for those that step out of that kind of monoculture.
Great, thank you. If you just want to hold on to the mic for a minute, Emily, I think just going back to your reference earlier to the change in geopolitics and the huge changes since the start of 2025. So last year when we ran this event, it was aligned with the UK government's announcement around the new UK AI Opportunities Action Plan. And as part of that featured quite heavily in the discussion at the last meetup, with a hope that governments would start to consider how AI can benefit everyone and not just the tech giants. So over the last year, we've certainly seen the intersection of geopolitics and the tech giants evolve significantly. So we're just keen to hear from you what you think the opportunities and risks are that are associated with this.
Yeah, so I think in 2025, we saw a move away from people discussing things like responsible AI and thinking about AI ethics, to things like security and in military contexts. So now people who are working in responsible AI, like they can't utter those words in these contexts, in government contexts or other kinds of contexts, because they're just going to be shut out the door, that they're a part of some kind of agenda. And we see this move to making sure that AI can be used, in these military contexts or security and other kinds of ways. So I think that's a challenge then, because there's a lot of work still to be done on making sure that we use AI in a responsible way that doesn't harm citizens and actually can help citizens. I mean, I think that there is some hope, though, for other areas of AI regulation. So in Australia, in 2025, we saw the social media ban for children up to age 16. And now the UK Parliament is opening comments on a similar kind of regulation. So so I have some optimism there for this year, that we can see some movement in regulation in terms of protecting children for AI. We're not going to see regulation coming out of the US for at least the next 3 years, but hopefully, the UK and the EU can start to grapple with some of these problems. Yeah.
So I think another aspect of the geopolitics is the cyber risk, and there are some good things. So the House of Lords, for example, today put the legislation amendment in place to ban social media under 16, though is likely to get reversed in the Commons. So there are some positive things. I think the negatives around cybersecurity risk and the kind of the threat landscape is just crazy when you look at it, of the potential sort of state actors using AI to attack your systems. So that's not going to get quieter in 2026. We thought it would hit its peak a few years ago when there was a general election in every major country in the world. I think that's only going to get louder. So I think being prepared for those cyber attacks being a reality rather than the exception is going to be the change.
Steph?
From my point of view, from the sector I work in, kind of geospatial, if you'd asked me this on January the 1st, I would have been very positive. We just had quite a few climate change incidents around the world. There was massive flooding in Indonesia in November that was all caused by forest degradation. And it was starting to come out in the news and people were talking about it, and we felt there's a real positive change and that people were going to be putting more money into the climate tech, health tech, everything that for doing it for the citizens rather than the companies. And then over the last few weeks, everything has changed that, and now, particularly in the geospatial domain, the money is going to go into defence, to security, to the looking after people's health, looking at income equality or the climate, whatever it is, has been put on a back burner. And a lot of the money is just going to be going elsewhere this year.
Emily, you mentioned the lack of, or the, if you like, the non-prediction of regulation in the US. What about for us? I mean, the impact on regulation, what do you think we could or should expect to see going forward here as a result of everything that's going on?
Yeah, so you mentioned the social media to 16 thing. I do see that there might be a push for more protection of people's likeness being used from AI with voices and faces and images. A lot now, like famous people's voices are being used in online advertisements and YouTube videos and things like this. Even now, images of children are being produced by these kinds of things. So I think that it's not going to take long for especially wealthy peoples whose likenesses are being taken to kind of try to stand up and prevent that from happening. And politicians, for good reasons, don't like to see children being harmed. So I'm hopeful that in the next year we'll see some push towards protecting people's likeness in terms of AI, at least here in Europe and in the UK.
I think one of the challenges with regulation, and bearing in mind in my day job I work for a regulator, is that AI is global, regulation isn't. So if you're working with a sector where you have very clear understanding of where the business is happening, like the energy sector, you can regulate it, and you can have different regulations in different parts of the world that work for those territories or countries. AI doesn't matter where you are physically generating it and using it, so the challenge of regulating is going to be much greater to an industry or a sector that is worldwide, where you can't and you never will have worldwide AI consistent regulation. So I think that's the challenge 2026 is going to have to work out.
Yeah, so just to push back on that a little bit, I do think that it's possible though. So we saw that with the GDPR, with data privacy rights. So like I said, I'm American and there is no GDPR in the US, but it's crazy to see the difference between the kinds of advertisements you get on your phone compared to being in Europe, just being the location of Europe compared to the US and the way that cookies work. And so when you are in the US, you think, yeah, you're being spied on and advertisements are coming, can listen to your conversations. It's extremely creepy. But here in Europe, you don't have that experience at all. So there is a way in which you have this, you can compartmentalize the way that technology works. And given the fact that Europe is such a huge market, right? If we really want to regulate these companies in certain kinds of ways, and we say your only option is to either not operate in Europe at all, right, which is what the GDPR did, versus not being regulated, right? I think that we have an opportunity to really try to stand their ground. The question is whether or not politicians are willing to do that.
Okay, so I think as we talk about regulation, and also as we go back to the previous question which talked about people, the ambition being for AI to be for the people, and not just for the tech giants. I think moving in now to the next question, really thinking about consumers of tech. The market is flooded with more and more gadgets every day, despite being embedded in the world of data and AI for over 20 years. I'm not a gadget person, but I was absolutely astounded last weekend when I was at my parents' house and my 80-year-old father pulled me aside to tell me that I needed to get him a pair of these new AI glasses. Now, I will set the context of this. My dad has macular degeneration and is quickly losing his sight. And he had, because I'm not a gadget person, I hadn't really paid too much attention to, what they are. I've got children who've got they've got the VR, they've got this, they've got that. I'm surrounded by it, but don't pay too much attention to it. But my dad had come across through one of the charities that he receives information from. He'd started to learn more about the life-changing examples that these wearable glasses, sort of AI glasses, have for people who are losing their sight. And so he's had me for the last week running around, learning about it. He's been sending me, you need to watch this on BBC iPlayer, can we go to John Lewis and go and get a demo? And the more I've learned about it, the more I'm like, oh, actually, do you know what? Yeah, for you, these really could be life-changing. So I will report back. But on that note, I'd just like to ask the panel, are there any innovations on the horizon that you believe could really be significant for society, environment, economy, and we see them coming into the fore in this next year?
Yeah, I am looking forward to seeing a speech bubble up there next year and informing us of how your father's getting along. That'll be excellent. I think I alluded to this before, actually, when I was talking, that people are going to start not thinking about AI in terms of, oh, it's AI, where can we apply it? But start thinking about the problem and then figuring out the solution. And I think from my perspective, I've always worked in kind of vision machine learning, and that area is very related to the glasses. I think it's going to have its moment. There's been a lot of LLMs. We've been talking a lot about multimodal. I know there's a lot coming in self-driving cars from what I've been hearing and reading about. And I think this is really the time when people who are building products that actually solve a problem now have the technology, the infrastructure, the data foundations to really build them and produce them. The other thing I have on this, just to steal all the time, is on the other side, there's been a lot about large language models, multimodal models, all the leaderboards you see for who can be the cleverest LLM for this and Elo scores for that. There's still going to be that. That's still going to go on. They're always going to do it. All the big tech, OpenAI, Meta, all of them are going to keep wanting to compete on those leading boards. But it's going to start coming in for the smaller models, and it's going to be much more about how can we make the smallest model possible that still gives you that accurate data, because that way they can start being put into products. I know that within the space industry, people are trying to work out how you can put these types of models on satellites, which is an incredibly fun problem, because you can't just plug it into the wall. You've got to power it, you've got to run it, it's got to be small enough that you can put it up there and it's not going to use all your energy before you next travel around and see the sun again. So that's going to be a really big thing, and an enabler even for all these products, so that people can start making things that actually will change people's lives.
I'm going to try and mention an example that doesn't revolve around AI, but I think some of the technology that's been around for a long time, when it starts to be integrated with systems, we'll start to see a bigger value. So, for example, sensors and robotics being put into houses. So with AWAB's law coming in to Scotland in terms of removal of mould from social housing properties, you can do that much better if you use sensor technology and you get your predictive analytics working really well. So I think some of those technologies that have been around for a long time can start to make a real difference in terms of people's lives.
Yeah, and I think in the Data Lab we've got a huge number of examples of where we've supported projects on that, whether it be predicting falls, helping to, just generally helping people to live independently at home for longer. When you start to see the technologies and you actually start to think, and it's one of the things that on a personal level I always say, what attracted you to work for the Data Lab, and it's when you're able to sit here and tell these stories about projects that really, really do change lives. And I think the opportunity is huge, but at the same time there is the balance there of a lot of risk and actually understanding what these technologies are that we're dealing with. So, and I think as well, I think really important thing, it'd be quite, I'm going to go a bit off piece here, but just as we talk about the acceleration of technology and the increase in consumer, what do you feel about the risk of the potential for us to increase the kind of digital divide when actually what we should really be doing is trying to use these technologies to close it?
I think it's got the potential for get even wider, but the example you just gave about your dad shows that it's not across the board. I heard someone talking the other day about a group of digital volunteers that go into care homes and help residents set up their phone, use an app. And I think that kind of basic way of looking at practical ways that we can start to reduce the digital divide is really important to prevent it from widening.
I think I agree with Nick there. I think that the thing here is we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We've been teaching and coaching and mentoring people for centuries about different things, and within the AI, the tech, the data community, we need to just do the same things. It's about going back to the absolute basics of what do people need. For people in nursing homes, they need help using their phone. For people in tech companies, they need guidance and reminders about what actually it is they're using. For us at Space Intelligence, we've just kicked off a whole set of workshops and sessions for people, for all of us to basically come together, and each person's taking a different session, and we're just going, well, what have we learned? How are we using this? What could we be doing? And playing around with it and learning and teaching and questioning, I think, as well. We just go, well, why? Why did that method work over this method when we're doing this? Why did we not do that? And it's what we've been doing forever. It's what we did when we started working with data. It's what we did when computers came along, and we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We just need to do exactly the same we did before, but make sure we do it and don't leave people behind.
Yeah, I just want to echo one of the things you said, that another part of the divide is just the divide of literacy of how to use these technologies, right? So we need to really try to invest in teaching what AI is in schools. How do you use AI correctly? What are the limitations of it? The public just runs to ChatGPT as if it's Google, as if it's Wikipedia. But it's not those things, right? And just increasing that, technological literacy, I think would go a long way there.
One very quick thing. I actually saw something today from a study that basically was in terms of using things like ChatGPT and Google's and Anthropics, etc. There's kind of a 7% power user base of people that use it really well, and the other 93% just use it like Google search.
Yeah, which goes back to skills. Let's go back to the whole skills, literacy, awareness, understanding, I think. And when it comes to the LLMs, it's, as you called out there, it's about the effective use, but it's also about that awareness and understanding of environmental impact, hallucinations, bias, there's so many things that go there. So it's been quite refreshing actually to have got so far through this with LLM, I think until the last question had only come into the conversation once, which was really good. But the question I like to ask you now is, is this bubble about to burst, or is this just the start when it comes to LLMs? Where are you positioned on that?
I don't think it's going to burst quite yet, but I think people's understanding of some of the impacts of using them, I think, is starting to get there. So the sustainability of LLMs in terms of their energy usage in particular, I think is starting companies, it's then a cost for companies, right? So that's starting people to look at smaller language models. And I think as people start to understand the challenges they're trying to solve with AI and LLMs, I think that will result in companies moving towards more specific ones rather than the mainstream ones. But I don't think it's going to happen tomorrow.
Anyone disagree with that? When we come to questions, if anyone in the audience disagrees with that, hear your thoughts?
I mean, I also agree it's going to burst, but I don't think in the next year. I think it'll probably take more time. I think people will start to realize more and more the financial loss that can occur if they use these large language models. So one example also coming out of Australia this past year was Deloitte gave the Australian government commissioned a report from Deloitte, and they just used some large language models, and it was just fabricated, the report. And so then they had to pay back 440,000 Australian dollars for that. And then the reputational damage, right, that comes from that. So I think this year we'll see more and more companies realizing, hey, wait a minute, maybe this doesn't actually help our bottom line after all. But I think it'll take longer for the bubble to burst than just this 1 year.
Yeah, I completely agree with what both of they said. So again, going last when I agree, I'm going to have to think of something original. But no, it's not going to burst this year. What I do think is it's interesting that we are talking about it bursting, because if you think about your classic hype cycle, I think that tells us a lot about where we are and therefore about what is going to be coming this year. So if people are starting to think the bubble's bursting, maybe they're starting to realize that there's a lot of hype. And I think that will help us in how we can actually use AI for something that is going to be beneficial. We'll start stretching, as Emily said, we'll start realizing that these mistakes, and there'll be consequences, and that will force people to actually take notice and set some frameworks and regulation around things.
Okay, thank you. So, final question from me before we open out to the audience. Are there any new trends that you see on the horizon?
This means I get to go first, ladies, and then you've got to think of something. I realised I didn't write myself any notes on this one. So are there any trends? I think people are, because they're getting more informed about AI, and this is, again, perhaps more of a hope than an expectation, that people start to look for the challenges and then how they can use AI to solve it, rather than the question that you quite often get is, are we using AI? Where can we use it? Rather than what is the problem? So it's, if you'll allow me, a hope rather than a trend and an expectation.
I think I've from what I've been saying, I've covered quite a lot, particularly in terms of like the small language models, and that trend's definitely going to come in. As Nick said, people starting to apply it better. I'm desperately trying to think of something that's not doom and gloom. I feel I've been quite negative on things, particularly around the idea of the geopolitical and it focusing more on the companies and defence than health. I think one thing I would say is going to come in, because we have such good technologies now, such good basics that we can build upon. I think there is going to be a burst of new companies and applications of this in what is, I'm predicting it's going to be quite a tough financial landscape. So I think there's going to be a lot of hope, but also a lot of disappointment for people along the way.
Yeah, I'm not sure about trends. I mean, maybe one thing, just grasping at straws here, is I just had to fill out a survey because the schools here in Edinburgh are thinking about whether to have a phone ban, and for primary and secondary schools. And one of the questions was, do you feel the same way about smartwatches? And so I think maybe if they ban phones from school, there might be a trend to reach towards other kinds of wearables like watches that might go through the radar as not being as bad.
Okay, so now it's over to you. Floor is open for questions for any of our panelists, but also, in addition to questions, we would be really interested to hear about any thoughts you have or any predictions you have, or what you see as being the next trend on the horizon. So when I do come round, if you would like to ask a question, please put your hand up and I'll bring you this microphone, so just so that we can keep it for the live feed. So, any questions? Moira? If you'd just like to introduce yourself when you ask a question as well, that would be great.
I'm just starting this off just to help you all out here. So I'm Moira McKenzie. I'm the Deputy Chief Exec in Data Lab's sister innovation centre, so the Digital Health and Care Innovation Centre. So where we're seeing some trends round about an interest and use in AI is definitely looking at the key challenge areas. So one of the key challenges coming through is very much in the diagnostic side. So obviously scanning, screening, all those types of things, and where diagnostic technologies can be as accurate and faster than many of our poor clinicians who are struggling with the weight of all the kind of demand coming through. Another area that we're seeing quite a lot of interest in is in the skills and education space. So one of the projects that we're working on just now is looking at the use of virtual reality and AI for the purpose of training professionals in suicide prevention and awareness. So quite a kind of hard-hitting area of activity, but a huge enthusiasm from the National Education Board, so NES, looking at that education and training space and thinking again how they might adopt some of these new technologies in a different way. So just hopefully some positive examples of where there's some explorations taking place just now.
Thanks, Moira. I've got someone at the back. Is there anyone else? Right, I'll start at the back and I'll work my way back down, okay?
Hello, thank you. Very insightful discussion. My question, my name is Nagu. I'm a co-founder of a company called Vidai. We are building an AI gateway here in Scotland. The question which I have is, given the regulatory inequality that exists across the globe, or if I can use the word regulatory safe havens, how do you see the data sovereignty playing out? Because people can use the data from here and train it other side, even though we have regulations on our own, especially given the US cloud law, which allows data to be easily transferred to the other side whenever they want. So how do you see that playing out?
I think it's going to become more and more of a challenge. So not just the data sovereignty, but the hosting and technology. So it's difficult to it's not impossible, but it's difficult to cloud host at the moment without involving a big US tech company. And even if you can make a decision that you're going to use UK data centres, or even if you expand that to include EU and Irish data centres, as some organisations do, you can still do that, but you're still reliant on the technology of the US tech companies. So I think that's going to be more of a conversation. So as an organisation, we used to use a cloud provider called UK Cloud. It went insolvent about 3 years ago. It was a government-created cloud hosting body, and that no longer exists. So I think that conversation of should countries be spinning up their own hosting services as opposed to purely the data centres, I think is going to become more of a conversation.
Yeah, Just on that point, I know in the Netherlands they're now talking about this very thing. So it's on their horizon to make sure that the DigiID system, the thing that you use to identify yourself electronically on all sorts of government websites, that it doesn't get put on a US cloud service where right now the current cloud service they have is running into some problems there. So I think it is on people's radars, and it would be good for people to think about solutions to that problem.
Back down if you want to put your hands up again. There was 2 people over here.
Thank you. Stelios Christodoulou. I'm an engineer for Viasat satellite company. So actually I have 2 questions. Is that okay? So one question is, you mentioned this statement here written down that AI is global, regulation isn't global. I want to give you the example of spectrum regulation and telecoms regulation where there is national capability. There are national regulators, but there is the International Telecoms Union, and the countries have kind of agreed that we need to, signals spill over the borders, and we can't just do it nationally. We need an umbrella. We still keep our national capability, but we have this international umbrella. And I think the same thing is happening with all the internet tech. Anybody can set up VPN and pretend that they're not in the UK, they are in US. They can use Starlink, they can use whatever, and there's no borders in technology, so it's the same scenario. That was the first question. The second question... Yeah, sure.
To the second one, sorry. So I agree, there are examples where you can get a large proportion of the global, and telecoms is one, but if you live in an area that isn't a large country, so I lived in the Falklands for 10 years, they're not allowed to use Starlink because they aren't allowed to license in the Falklands, because the Falkland Island government at that point didn't allow satellite providers to provide the internet. So I think the challenge is, even though you can get like a chunk of the world to do the same thing, there are still always going to be the oddities, and with AI being able to situate yourself anywhere, I think loopholes are going to creep in.
Sorry, the second thing was spatial related. Do you see, because there's been like a raster data and vector data were like 2 different worlds, and raster data was a different world to any other data, basically. Do you see we're getting to the point where it's no longer a black art for a specialized few people? And
that is an excellent question. Yes, bringing this back to kind of data and AI in that sense, I think with the development, with the foundation models that we term it in geospatial rather than kind of large language models, they are becoming much more ubiquitous. People are creating them, they're serving them in a way that I've not seen before. Hugging Face is full of geospatial stuff now, and it's making people have access to this. So there's so many free services out there now that we can just go and look at a map, and there's even some way you can ask it a question and go, how many people are in this box that I've just drawn? It's becoming much more accessible. At the same time, it's almost becoming more of a black box, because people are seeing it in the same way we talk about, LLMs and hallucinations and not giving the right answer. We're now putting this vision layer on top of that with multimodal data, and you'll be able to draw a box around a part of the world and go, what was there flooding here? What's there? Is there some sort of defense structure? And what it will give you out is a graph and some text, and it looks very convincing, and there's nothing around it to check, because it doesn't show you how it's found that data or what it's done. So I think there's definitely the opening up of that, and all the infrastructure's there to do it, and many people are doing it. But it goes back to that idea of trust that we have, that what is lagging behind is the the public and the ability for people to question what they're seeing, in the same way that we were doing that with LLMs and ChatGPT when they came out in 2022, back in the day.
I'm Jeremy Lowe. I work for a financial institution that benchmarks other financial institutions, and we've been lagging behind a bit in AI. We've seen machine learning come along in the last few years, and that's been great to see. Machine learning, I think, has got a long track record of being pretty useful. 2026 will be a year where we start to see large language models deployed across the financial sector, particularly in the custodian banks. And I'm a bit of a skeptic of large language models, so I'm curious, as experts, if you think there's a space in something as precise as finance and mathematics for large language models. Sorry, difficult question.
My sound bite on this would be yes, with the right guardrails. It's very simple to say. This comes back to our point of people going, oh, we're going to use agentic AI because that's what people are doing. That's what we should do. If you approach it with asking the right questions and saying what could go wrong, how bad would it be if that happened, what guardrails can we put in, then yes, there is a space for it. But only if you treat it like any other engineering problem.
Guardrails as well. There's the skills as well as do people understand the risks of the systems they're using, and I think very closely tied together. But if you deploy a system across an organisation and you do it properly, this happens all the time. We see examples of this on a daily, weekly basis, that systems are deployed but staff are not upskilled appropriately. And then they're either not being used inconsistently, or they're not being used effectively, or they're just not being used properly. Then there's a huge danger there. And actually, I think for people to understand the consequences, so people need to understand the opportunity. There's a real balance there to help people to understand the huge benefit and opportunity to using these systems that are available to them, and they absolutely should be encouraged where appropriate to do so, but they also have to understand the consequences of misuse.
I would add that ensuring they're also in line with the organisation's values. So the energy usage, for example, of LLMs, I don't think people are linking their sustainability policies, which I appreciate have had some changes in recent years, but the sustainability policies with the use of LLMs with that volume of data as well.
Just working our way around. We've got plenty of time, so
it's okay. Nathan Thompson, data scientist at the National Nuclear Laboratory. I was just interested in getting your forecasts for the job market in terms of data science roles for the coming year, both in terms of abundance and sort of skills you see becoming more and less important.
I think I alluded to this slightly before. I don't want to paint a massively positive picture. What I do think is that as people start using these systems more, as they start going wrong, people are going to learn. And I think the skills that are needed aren't just, look at me, I can write a bit of code and deploy a system, because a lot of people can do that now. What you need is curiosity, it's interest, it's going, well, what problem do I need to solve, and how can I incorporate what I know? How can I incorporate everything we've done in the last 10,000 years that we've learned, and how can I use this new tech, this AI to make that better? But I'm thinking specifically here from a science point of view. It's kind of what I do, that, science works. It worked for a very long time. And we don't need to change that. We just need to work out what bits of it we want to do better, and how can we use things to do that. And I think as 2026 goes on, people are going to realise that's actually what we need.
Yeah, in terms of skills, I mean, I see a real risk of there being massive de-skilling and this gap of expertise. So right now, you can use these models well to your advantage to write code and all sorts of things, but it's because those people have the experience and expertise to know when the model is completely wrong and when it's on the right track. And that's when it actually can help someone move faster. But if you don't have those years of experience, you don't have those fundamentals down, then it just is going to be a drag and introduces so many bugs and security risks. So in terms of skills, I think the best thing that you can do is just, continue to build the fundamental skills that people have been building for the last decades, right? And not rely on this in a way that creates, cognitive rot.
I think the other thing we need to be thinking about is what skills are needed for the jobs of the future. So I've got an 11-year-old nephew who wants to be a software engineer. Well, I can tell him now what he needs to train in to be a software engineer. What I can't tell him is whether we'll need software engineers in 10, 15 years. So I think that looking forward to the skills for the jobs of the future is going to be the really challenging part. Yeah.
Just to add as well, without taking this on a completely different tangent, but one of the things, or one of the conversations that we are finding ourselves part of more frequently now is that for a long time, the talk around skills and data science and AI has been at the kind of application level, and it's been at the deployment level and the user level. We're now needing to think about, with this compute, we're needing to think about, the compute and whether the data centres and all the talk of infrastructure, the roles that will be required around there are much more of an engineering perspective as well. So all of a sudden, when I joined the job, it was data science, data scientists, and then within 2 years of being in the data lab, it was like actually we're moving into data engineers, and then it's been ML engineers, and what we see is actually the job role definitions change slightly, but the scope and number of job roles, and I think that's something that we are going to see is like the jobs of the future now. When you're talking about your 11-year-old nephew, there's probably jobs there that we're not even thinking about. The typical one that comes up is the prompt engineer. Like 6 years ago, would a prompt engineer even have been considered as a role? So I think it's about, I think when we get into these conversations on skills as well, a lot of it is about the problem solving, the critical thinking, but also, regardless of your thoughts on AI, the acceptance that it's not going to go away, and actually you may not, people talk about job displacement, and you may not lose your job to a computer, but you will lose your job to someone who knows how to interact with these systems and so actually it's in everyone's interests to focus on the literacy at whatever, even if that's at a very basic level. It really, really is key, and that from a kind of very early age is something that we need to put forward. Sorry for all the microphone problems. We've got some over here. Yeah. I knew I would get the microphones wrong.
Thank you. My name's Oliver Riley. I'm a data scientist at Tesco Bank. You mentioned quite a lot about, the various issues now with AI. You mentioned the environmental issues and also the geopolitical change. And I wonder now, with sort of the increased question on the ethicality of using the models, maybe some of the key players in the AI space don't have the world's best interests at heart. With those increased issues around ethicality, do you think we'll get some pushback in investment at the commercial level back on this kind of thing, rather than, or you mentioned as well that you think you'll get people thinking a bit more about how they use the models and whether it's right to use them. Do you think we'll get that at a commercial level pushback on the investment, which might actually cause the bubble to burst?
I don't think that people typing into LLMs to get new memes of cats is going to go away in 2026. That's definitely going to be a thing. And I believe that that's probably where most of this energy usage comes from. In terms of a commercial sense, I do know that something like 90% of Fortune 500 companies, their C-suite have sustainability targets linked to their pay. I don't think I've ever seen, and I could be wrong, and I'm happy to be correct in this, I don't think I've ever seen a proper measure of how a single query or a run of an agent actually has what its carbon emissions are and what its effect is, because no one has to report it. And I don't think that's going to happen in 26 either, just because we're, all of these data centers, and everything's US based, the vast majority. So there's going to be no regulation there to change that. The company, what we do, obviously, we're all, we're trying to not use carbon. But in reality, using Copilot or training a model it's a very small part of carbon emissions. We could probably do a lot more for the environment by running that model and making sure we're making that difference and getting the right data in the right hands to make meaningful change. That's at least our policy within the company. We measure that and we track it as best we can. Ultimately, we just don't have the data to do it with.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm not sure that the ethical argument changes people's attitudes here. I mean, I tell my students this argument as part of an argument why they shouldn't use large language models, and that doesn't seem to faze them to use it. But I mean, and it took a long time for big investment firms to try to divest from fossil fuel companies. Right? I think that there's so much fear of missing out on the opportunity here. And people also have the attitude that these models will actually solve climate change. Right? So I think that there's a lot of work to be done on the narrative front, right? And thinking about the narrative sustainability and how, like, the power of AI and its limitations to push back against the kind of hype that we're seeing. But I think that'll take time.
Thank you. So unfortunately, our time has come to an end. I'm getting the cut signs at me now. I'm sure we could have kept asking. I know there's still a lot of questions. So what I will say is that there is still networking time. So if you have questions for the panellists afterwards, please continue the conversation outside. I'd just like to wrap up by saying I think it's been a really interesting discussion. I think we could have talked for a lot longer. I think a couple of times people have referred or kind of acknowledged that they feel like they're being a bit doom and gloom and a bit pessimistic. I think it's pragmatic. I think it's about responsibility, and I think it's about there is so much opportunity, and there is huge amount of excitement about what the year ahead could bring. I think we're living in very, very uncertain times, and I think a lot of that uncertainty will ultimately impact what we do see happening. But I think it's great to have that balanced conversation that's not about, it's not one or the other, one pole or the other. What I'd like to do is I'd like to say a huge thank you to our panellists for tonight, but I'd also like to ask them just to finish up by sharing with us one word to describe 2026 in data and AI.
Resilience. And I'm not going to explain.
You've not got time to explain. Get you off.
I have a hyphenated word.
Okay, I'll let you off.
Tech power grab.
What's that, sorry?
Tech power grab.
Tech power grab, okay.
Yeah.
Accountability.
Accountability, there we go. So tune in about this time next year to see where we are with these predictions. Just before we go, again, a huge thank you to our panellists, to Steph, to Emily, and to Nick. A huge thank you to all of you for joining us tonight, and to everybody online as well. Just before we go, just a reminder, if you've enjoyed tonight, we've got a number of events and webinars coming up over the next month, which are shown on the slide up here. As we move into February, our monthly theme for the community will be education, and marketing, sorry, I'm looking at, but with our skills, we've got our event, end of January is education, sorry, I'm looking at the wrong page here. So we've got a range of events coming up, a couple online, one in Edinburgh, one in Glasgow. All of those events can be accessed through the community. We also have, very excited, in May, we have the return of Data Fest, which is our annual conference, which runs every year. This year we'll be back at the Assembly Rooms for 2 days in May. If you go to the website, you'll see that the speaker lineup is beginning to be announced now, and we would love to see you all there. Would encourage everyone to provide feedback on tonight's event. I really hope you've enjoyed it. I hope it's just the start of our conversation. As I say, you're welcome to go back outside and continue to network for a short time. But the feedback is really important to us, because we want to make sure that you're giving up your time to be here, and we want to make sure that that's valuable time for you, and we're always really keen to improve our events. So thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you again. Thank you. Good night. You can get off the chairs now. You jump down. You don't want people to watch you get off them. I'm not